come up until later, but please ask me about Sophia Johnson. But anyways, while some men risked life and limb in the service of their country, women who stayed home, according to their own stories, risked perhaps more. The loss of a husband, brother, or son could spell financial ruin in a society that privileged male over female labor and strictly delineated who was supposed to perform various types of work. As we heard this morning, oftentimes they did it anyway. But that said, marauding soldiers could destroy a family's livelihood in moments through the requisition, theft, or destruction of fences, livestock, crops, housing, or household goods. And although these things were often listed as male possessions, women, like New Yorker Mary Adkins, claimed co-ownership of that property. In the absence of their husbands, these newly widowed women needed to claim ownership of the land or property they had accumulated with their husbands in order to secure a livelihood without relying on charity. Both men and women, by the way, wrote about how much they hated charity. Adkins, whose house was burned during the destruction of Buffalo, lamented that, quote, "Your memorialist shared the melancholy fate of being turned upon the charity of her acquaintances, her house and family reduced to ashes, the industry of many a year in complete ruin, her children needy, helpless, and fatherless, and at that most inclement season of the year, which to your memorialist were trials that neither time nor peace can truly delineate." But despite the wording of her lament, Adkins also showed a remarkable level of initiative within her own story. Adkins was not the weeping widow of the classic tale, lying prostrate while her world crumbled around her. By her own admission, she returned to Buffalo and rebuilt her home for herself and her children, relying on credit and what little she had left. Of course, at the time she wrote her petition in 1818, her creditors were getting a little bit irate, as her borrowing had been predicated on promised U.S. restitution, which had yet to materialize, and would in fact not materialize for another 50 years or so. She and other frontier women may have claimed feminine fragility, but their stories said otherwise. Atkins' claims on the government were based on her claims of participation through loss. And whoever it was who wrote her petition for her, because it certainly wasn't her, apparently did not feel that her independent action would harm her overall claims. She was not so unfeminine in her actions. This was considered okay. But there were some independent actions that needed a little bit more explanation. Women, as we know from probably every war in human history, maybe I'm exaggerating, but despite any public conventions that would have removed women from combat, women still fought. Sometimes dressed as men, oftentimes dressed as themselves. There are very few of these cases in the petitions, however. A woman's combat credit was that of her husband, son, brother, or father, not herself. But every now and again, a woman appeared whose claim to remuneration could not be explained without describing, in properly feminized terms, her own martial contributions to the war effort. Ruama Williams and her husband Amariah, who were residents of northern New York, sent their petition to Congress in 1821. According to Ruama, or her husband, lawyer, or scribe, she herself signed the petition with an X, but it's actually all written in first person, which I find rather interesting. She was at home alone when 3 British soldiers retreating from Plattsburgh, New York, stopped in her home, demanded refreshment, searched for weapons, and finding none, departed. For reasons not described, one of them returned and threatened to kill her. The petition goes on to describe her husband's return, the resulting out-and-out brawl, and Ruama's own bravery in first taking the soldier's gun away and then taking him prisoner with it. To quote the petition, she was advancing within a few paces of them, when she thought she was about near enough to discharge it, the gun. Her strength suddenly forsook her and she fell toward them, the gun dropping out of her hands. However, being not insensible that their situation was then more dangerous than ever, her strength pretty soon returning, she attempted again to take the gun. She laid hold of the barrel, while the soldier had hold of the muzzle, he having gotten her husband, who was a lame man, under. Yes, they were indeed brawling in the backyard. And seeing that she was resolved to discharge the piece, he endeavored to get the muzzle against her husband's head. But she, perceiving his drift, pushed him aside aside, discharged it into the earth, and immediately snatched it from him, and holding it with her left hand, she took him by the straps of his cartridge box and the belt of his bayonet, and got him upon his feet, saying, "You are my prisoner." Laura Secord, eat your heart out. But great stories aside, because that's a great story. There are two very important things going on in this petition, and one of them is that the very physical act of capture is feminized through Ruama's fainting spell. Does anyone actually believe that she was holding a gun to a soldier's head and she fainted? And then moments later, she's got right back up. She's a president. I think she tripped, personally. That's my current theory. But you know, I'm no doctor, maybe this could happen, whatever. But it doesn't matter. Whatever was happening there, whether she was telling the truth or not, her moment of weakness and feminine fragility in the middle of this conflict both accepted her from any accusations of unnatural masculinity and provided evidence for her claim. You see, the second thing going on here is that Ruama was petitioning for an annuity because she claimed that this act, this particular event, had so damaged her, that she was so injured, mentally and physically by this, that it completely broke her constitution. And that she was unable to work, her husband was lame, and she needed an annuity for that. Her wartime participation, her moment as a warrior, was too much for her. But there is a question here. Why is she the one petitioning? Her husband was just as involved in this capture as she was. He was wrestling on the ground with the man. And he was lame. He had, according to the petition, he was injured, he was sick, he was still alive at the writing of this petition. Why is it Ruama that we hear? Why is it her story that we hear and not his? I actually don't have an answer to that. And if anyone has run across these people in any place, please let me know. They completely disappear from the record as soon as they find out that they do not actually get their petition. They do not receive their annuity. But Ruama's story, as interesting and exciting as it is very unusual. Most women writing to the Lieutenant Governor, to Congress, told stories of war loss, wherein people or possessions had been lost forever, where the government was responsible for fulfilling broken promises and paying the damages that the war had accrued. But like I said, these women did not want charity. They wanted repayment. This is even seen, even Ruama Williams, whose plea for an annuity may seem to the modern eye to be sort of a request for charity, was seen by Ruama as payment for services rendered in the protection of her country. This is what I mean when I say that women viewed themselves as active and important participants in the war effort. Their petitions may be couched in language of deference and feminine fragility, but they knew that their service, their participation, their sacrifices were worth money. How much did I have? Okay, I'll try to finish up quick. Now, as you may have noticed, most of my examples thus far have been from New York. This is not because I hate Canada. Nor is it because upper Canadian women didn't have most of these same experiences. It's with the exception that very few of them were threatening British soldiers with their own guns. Frankly, it's because upper Canadian women tended to be a little bit more taciturn, a little bit more respectful in their petitions, and so it's not quite as much fun. But there is one experience that only upper Canadian women really had to deal with, and that was deserting family members. Now, as many of you likely know, the British forces were plagued with desertion during the war. In the midst of a border war with better wages and 100% less likelihood of getting shot just a stone throw away, upper Canadian militiamen, some of whom were American citizens by birth, many of them chose to desert rather than fight, and some of them left family. Take, for example, the utterly furious Nancy Smith of Upper Canada, whose husband died of an illness contracted while on garrison duty during the war. John had unfortunately mistakenly omitted his widow from his will, which divided his property among his 8 children and was supposed to stipulate that their second son, Henry, was going to look after his mother. And it didn't. But to make matters worse, to quote the petition, her sad, ill-natured, and disaffected son, before any arrangement could be made in the premises, absconded to the enemy's country during the late war in a seditious and unwarrantable manner, whereby all the property invested in him, fee simple through the means of the said will, or otherwise, is forfeit and consequently reverts to the crown. So Nancy Smith, who was very displeased in this petition, you can tell, was petitioning to get her land back, calling on her husband's loyal memory as justification for the return while distancing herself from her son, the deserter. You see, a woman's ideological identity was just as important as her male counterparts. It was not enough to have participated through sacrifice or action. She also had to show the proper feelings towards king and country. An Upper Canadian woman needed to be loyal. A New York woman needed to be patriotic. And women from both places used their stories about the men in their lives to construct images of themselves. It is impossible, therefore, to truly differentiate these stories by gender. For when a woman discussed a man, she was in truth talking about herself. All of these women, and I have many more stories, told stories of active, not passive participation in a war that directly touched their lives. I think it's easy, when reading stories of battles or heroic deeds, to forget that the War of 1812 happened on the doorsteps of Upper Canadians and New Yorkers in the border region. So participation wasn't so much a grand adventure or even a choice as it was something everyone did. And women did not see themselves on the outskirts of the conflict. They were directly involved in ways that generally didn't have the same star potential as a militiaman charging up Queenston Heights or a soldier in Harrison's army. But I think the point here is that women thought of themselves as important contributors to the war effort and told stories wherein they constructed idealized versions of themselves from the pieces of loss and deprivation, cheerfully born and from their stories of loyal, patriotic, or conversely, ill-natured family members. Yes, some widows wept, and then they told stories about all the other things they did. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maria. I wonder if she's not emphasizing the desertion of British soldiers. It's a little too much. What I didn't say in the introduction is that she's American. It's on! Fair game, because recently my daughter got married to an American, and so I live in Sudbury, and I've been spending time driving from my home in Sudbury, sometimes across northeastern Ontario, and then south to Michigan, through Michigan, and it's on those trips when I've thought, gee, what about northern Michigan? How come they got that part and we didn't? One of my roles on the Ontario Women's History Network is a member at large representing Northern Ontario. So, in the planning of this program, when everybody was talking about Niagara and Kingston and York, I said, excuse me, what about further west, further north, right? What about Algoma? What about Fort St. Joseph? What about Mackinac Island? And so this sent me on a search for someone who could bring us a more northern, more western perspective. And I'm delighted to introduce to you who I found to bring us this piece of the story. Cindy Ellen Crawford is working with the Algoma War of 1812 Commemoration Committee. And I don't know if Cindy will say a bit about this, but it's a, collaboration of several different groups working together in different historic sites as well. And so when we were introducing Cindy last night around, she said she was bringing greetings from all kinds of colleagues at the National Historic Site in Sault Ste. Marie, the Ermatinger site as well. So she is here to present a talk to us this still morning, Women of 1812 in Algoma. And she's particularly going to feature two individuals, Charlotte Ermatinger and Madelaine Askin. Cindy, we're really looking forward to this.
Thank you. Thanks very much. I very much appreciate the invitation by Owen and to Linda for lobbying for another voice from the North. It certainly feels nice to have company of other people from the North here as well, and a chance to share a little bit of our story in addition. As Linda had mentioned, I'm the regional project manager for Algoma 1812. This is an organization that was created to roll out a lot of the signature events pertaining to the War of 1812 on St. Joseph Island, Sault Ste. Marie, and involving the First Nations, Métis, and Francophone communities in the area as well. Incidentally, in case you're wondering what exactly was our role in the war, we were actually the site of the first military maneuver when the British and Indian Nations alliances took over the American Fort Michilimackinac, or Mackinac, quietly and without bloodshed on July 17, 1812. So I welcome you to attend any of the signature events that we have running this year from July 17th to 21st on St. Joseph Island and Sault Ste. Marie, and I have some information here for pickup if anybody is interested in more of the specifics. So I'd like to get back to the women. I chose Madelaine, Askins, and Charlotte Ermatinger because I thought they provided a great historical juxtaposition of two women who had basically the same roles in 1812 as wife, mother, and I'll use the term hostess, to visitors from all walks of life, be it fur traders, military, native, and so on. But how they're recorded in history is quite a sharp contrast, and this is what I'm hoping to shed a little bit of light on today and show you that dichotomy. So, Madelaine Peltier could be best described as a wife who was valued as a partner in the truest sense of the word. Her Charlotte's story, on the other hand, is almost non-existent, although her presence was integral to her husband's business success, and her story is carried on in more of an oral tradition versus a written story. So my talk today is to share their stories and contribute to the preservation in history. Madelaine Peltier was born in 1776, and she was from a French-Canadian family from the Windsor-Detroit area. She was educated, literate, and raised with all the social graces of an established, well-to-do family. Her family is considered one of the founding families in that area. At the age of 16 years, in 1791, she married John Askins Jr. He was from another prominent area family and well-educated, of solid social standing from a business and fur trading family. This is just a little side note because I was so excited to find this, but his family boasted one of the most impressive personal libraries in Michigan, and I know a number of people that are on the hunt still to this day to try and find books